So today is the first Sunday in Advent, the countdown to Christmas, a time of waiting and anticipation for the incarnation of Jesus. But what is the incarnation? Well, the incarnation simply means God becoming flesh. In the incarnation, God becomes man. How incredible is that? He joins us. He becomes one of us. And so, if God is going to become human, what is he going to need? Well, he's going to need a family, because humans have families. Each one of us here are the result of a long line of people. Not just our parents and grandparents, but people who go way back. We might often refer to them as our ancestors. Now, it's quite a popular thing these days to trace your family tree. People want to know what their family was like. Where do I come from? Where do my ancestors come from? Were there other people in my family who did the same job as I do, or had the same interests that I have? Sometimes people find wonderful stories of courage and love and honour. But sometimes when we dig into our family, we find out things that we wish we never knew. I remember a number of years ago, there used to be a TV program called Who Do You Think You Are? And what it did is it took a celebrity and they would research that celebrity's family tree, and you would see this person go on a journey as they found out about their ancestors. And there was one episode that I still remember quite profoundly. And this tells you how long ago it was, because the celebrity was Ainsley Harriott, who I'm not sure is really an A-list celebrity these days. But obviously, myself being a hardcore fan of Can't Cook, Won't Cook, had to watch this episode with Ainsley Harriott. But it was actually really sad, because the programme always began with the question, so what do you know about your family history? What do you already know? And with Ainsley Harriott, he was like, well, not a lot. I do know that way back in my family was slaves in Jamaica. But as the story unfolds, he is confronted with the fact that some of his family were slaves in Jamaica. But he's confronted with the fact that his great-great-grandfather was a slave owner. And it rocked him to think like a person like that could be in his family. And he said, 1 minute you're feeling this hatred for people who dominated and controlled and at times abused your family. And yet, my own grandfather was a slave owner himself. Watching it, you see how visibly upset he is. And we might be tempted to ask, well, why? What's the big deal? But it is a big deal, isn't it? Because our ancestors are who we came from. We are related to that person. Their life is connected to our life. And we might say of some people on our family tree, I wish they weren't in my family. I wish I wasn't connected to that. If we read history, and there are still modern examples of this even today, but people in positions of power and authority routinely try and hide the problematic members of their family. Kings hiding mentally disturbed family members anonymously in asylums. Celebrities not wanting you to find out about their disgraced uncle. Or politicians standing for office hiding a questionable relative. Because they know in all those cases they will be judged by their family. They're connected. History is full of this sort of behaviour. Important people don't want to be connected with scandal. It will disrupt what they are trying to achieve. So what about Jesus then? Jesus was going to have a family. Some ancestors. But Jesus was in the unique position that he could choose his ancestors, couldn't he? Give that opportunity to any presidential candidates, and they will stack their family with ex-presidents, Nobel Prize winners, and poets laureates, wouldn't they? Is that what Jesus did? No, let's find out what Jesus did with his ancestors. There are 2 genealogies given for Jesus in the Gospels, but it's the family line in Matthew's Gospel that we're going to look at this Advent season. And so, given that Jesus gets to choose who's in his family, who did he choose to be connected to? And what might that tell us about who Jesus is and why he joined our family in the first place? There are 42 names in Jesus' family tree in Matthew, but we're just going to focus in on 4 of them. And interestingly, 4 women. We'll look at this a bit later, another time, but women were not usually recorded in Jewish family trees, so even that by itself is remarkable. But the 4 women we're going to look at are Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. And what we're going to see is that Jesus came to be connected to people with messy lives, people on the outside, people who have been abused, and people who are ready to be faithful. And we are beginning this week with Rahab. So who is Rahab? We read part of the story of Rahab earlier in our service. Rahab was a prostitute who ran a brothel. She was a pagan living in Jericho. You know, that city that the Israelites walked around and God brought the walls tumbling down. God had brought his people out of Egypt and he's leading them, remember, on this conquest to deal with the giant clans, clearing up the family line of Canaan, Noah's son, who immediately rebelled against Jesus after the flood. Do you remember? And next on the list is Jericho. Everyone knew they were coming. It was no secret. News of this vast swarm of people sweeping through the land with God on their side, that news had spread. And whilst everyone in Jericho was pretty confident that their great walls would keep them safe, Rahab could see that the God of Israel would win. And so when the 2 spies came to her establishment looking for information, she used this opportunity to defect, to seek safety with the living God. And that, of course, is the whole point of this story. And that is what's so wonderful about Rahab, that even an immoral pagan like Rahab could see the power of the God of Israel. And so when she finds these 2 spies in her establishment, and she sees that they're in trouble, she helps them out by hiding them on her roof. What does she say when the coast is clear? In verse 9 she says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. The fear of you, we've seen everything that's happened, the way you've crossed the Red Sea and dealt with the 2 kings of the Amorites. And as soon as we heard of it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth below. In saying all this, Rahab wasn't simply recounting information that she knew. She was defecting. And she goes on to offer them a deal. She says, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I've dealt kindly with you, I've helped you out. Will you please now deal kindly with me and my father's house, and give us a sure sign that we will be delivered from death? She's asking for mercy. Be merciful to me. Have mercy on me. She is seeking refuge for herself and for her family. And of course, the spies agree, don't they? But there was a condition. When the day came, there was going to be a lot of chaos. And so the spies could only guarantee their safety if they identified themselves as part of Israel. And so she's told to take the red cord, the same cord that she'd used to help the spies escape. She's told to tie it in her window, and that would identify her as part of Israel. But why this sign? Why are we told about the colour of the cord? We could, of course, say, well, it's just simply what it was. It's just what she had at hand. And the vivid red colour obviously would be more obvious and visually noticeable to the invading soldiers. So that's why. But it's hard not to see a link between this scarlet cord, this red cord, and the red blood which the Israelites put over their doors on the night of the Passover. Because what happened at the Passover? God was bringing justice. He was going to put everything in its place. Just as here, he's bringing justice to the clans of Canaan. In the Passover, God was judging the gods of Egypt. That's what he says in Exodus chapter 12. How is he judging them? By taking their children. You will remember that the book of Exodus opens with Pharaoh ordering that the Israelite boys should be killed. And that's how Moses ends up in the Nile, ends up in the palace. Well, God does not primarily see Pharaoh as the one killing his children, but he sees it as the gods of Egypt who are killing his children. They killed Yahweh's firstborn, and now God is bringing judgment on them, on the other gods, by killing their firstborns. And so, God was only going to kill the firstborn that belonged to the Egyptian gods. And so how does God make this distinction on the night of the Passover? All who participate in the worship of Yahweh, who belong to Yahweh, would be safe. And so there is a warning. And this is the thing, isn't it? The warning goes to all of Egypt. Even Pharaoh is told, listen, if you put blood on the lintels, you'll be saved. This is the opportunity to abandon the Egyptian gods who are about to be judged and worship Jesus. And so he gives them this sacrificial meal and ritual to partake in. That is why he passes over. Not due to any blood satisfying his bloodlust or anything like that. Simply that the blood showed that they were church members, that they participated in the worship of Yahweh and were participating in the life of Jesus. And so in the same way, Rahab's family would be safe by a similar mark. Allegiance to and trust in Jesus, the God of Israel. The scarlet cord, like the blood of the Passover lamb, is a type of the blood of Christ, which is applied to us every week. Again, not to satisfy God, but to mark us out as his people who drink his blood, who receive his life. And so Rahab, of course, followed the instructions of the spies. She put the cord out her window, and by this faithfulness, she was saved, justified, and lived to see another day. And we can imagine Rahab saying to her family, after the spies have gone, come with me. There is a place of safety amongst all of this death and danger. Come inside. And the narrator of Joshua records their happy ending. Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day, the day of writing, not today, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua had sent out to spy out Jericho. What a wonderful story. When her world and her old life collapsed around her, when her life was nothing but a smoking wreckage, she and her family walked into a new life, to be part of a new family with a new God. And more than that, her family now has a future they could scarcely imagine, for from her would come the Messiah. Rahab married Salmon. I don't know if you meant to say salmon or salmon. I say salmon because it sounds too fishy otherwise. And their line eventually produced David the king, through whom Jesus was born. And a little detail which I think is really lovely and changes the way you read the story in the Bible is that from everything we can tell, it seems very likely that Salmon was one of the spies who Rahab hid. Isn't that lovely? I love that little note. They married and lived happily ever after. Not perfectly, but with Jesus. When we read the Bible, it becomes very clear that people are important to God. All over the Bible there are lists of names, and clearly remembering these people is important to God, and so this should be important to us too. In Matthew's Gospel, this list of names is what we might call Jesus' natural family. Kind of like his biological family, the line physically which he came through. But there is another list of names which we might call Jesus' spiritual family. It's not exhaustive by any means, but it is a list of people whose faithfulness was remarkable and worth imitating. And we find this list in Hebrews chapter 11. I'm not going to read it all, but I'm going to summarize it. It's a list of, by faithfulness, by faith, what people did. By faith, Abel offered to God. By faith, Enoch was taken. By faith, Noah heeded God's warning. By faith, Abraham obeyed God. By faith, Abraham left Ur. By faith, Abraham offered up Isaac. By faith, Isaac invoked blessing. By faith, Jacob blessed and worshipped. By faith, Joseph mentioned the exodus that was to come. By faith, Moses was hidden and refused to be called son of the Pharaoh's daughter. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea with Moses. Now, at this point, if you're tracking along with the Old Testament narrative, you might expect to read, by faith, Joshua led them into the promised land. But instead we hear, by faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Rahab is included in this great gallery of faithfulness. We are used to the ideas of kings and politicians and celebrities trying to hide the black sheep of the family. But here, not only does Jesus not hide her, he puts her front and center for everyone to see. He points at her and he's like, be like her. Be like Rahab. How can it be? How can it be that a woman like this becomes an example of faithfulness? How does this happen? Christmas. Christmas is how that happens. We said that important people don't want to be connected to scandal because it will disrupt what they're trying to achieve. But what if being connected to messy people was exactly what Jesus was trying to achieve? The whole point of Christmas is that Jesus joins us. He joins us in all of our mess. At Christmas, Jesus becomes a human. The power in heaven became a child on earth. He made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Philippians 2:7. Born in a manger, for there was no room for him at the inn. In the incarnation, Jesus joined us in our mess and our sorrow, not to wallow with us, but to lift us up out of it. Jesus joined us in order to defeat everything that was holding us down. You see, we just finished Genesis, haven't we? We finished Genesis 1 to 11. And what we've seen is that by the time humanity had finished making their deals with the devil and demons, we found ourselves trapped under layers of crud, trapped and hopeless. But Jesus joined us, and he comes to the very bottom layer, and he starts digging up. Jesus came down, he was born as a baby, and he learns to walk, and he learns to talk. He grew in wisdom and stature, the scriptures tell us. And as he grew, being a human, he controlled his body and his desires, defeating the passions of the human flesh. He then faced the devil in the wilderness and defeated the devil's temptations. He defeated greed, envy, and self-interest, and he just gave of himself always to the people around him. He defeated sickness, healing many. He defeated the demons, freeing people from their power. He loved those who were not loved by anybody else. And then he came to the cross, the boss fight, the final dungeon, and he defeated death, sin, and the devil, bursting out of the grave on the third day, emerging from the ground victorious, ascending to the Father, to the heavenly throne room. And now, you see, now there is this trail from the bottom of humanity, forged all the way to the height of heaven. Jesus has made this way back to the Father, so that no matter how far we fall, no matter how far we've gone, no matter how messy we are, Jesus has gone further. He went right the way down into Hades, into death. And it means that there is a way from wherever we are to where he is. And so that is how a woman like Rahab can be held up as an example to us. Not because she was perfect, not because her life was never messy, but because she found the way out. She found Jesus and she followed him. This is the hope of Christmas. This is the good news for messy lives. Reflecting on the life of Rahab, I can't help but think of women, even in our own community, who find themselves trapped in sex work. Our communities are filled with messy lives. A mess that is increasingly chosen and portrayed as a positive and progressive choice. Many young women are told that their body is a commodity and that they need to use it to its full advantage before it's past its best, to get friends, to find support, or to simply increase and make money with it. It's seen as a quick fix and an easy payday, a way out of their mess. But in reality, all that it does is bring more mess, more heartache, and more hurt. And these women, like Rahab, are not to be judged or condemned, but simply warned and loved and brought into the life of Jesus. There is only one way up through all the levels of muck, and money won't do it. Pleasure won't do it. Having a life partner won't do it. Only Jesus can save us from our messy lives, whatever we have done, and however deep we find ourselves. The incarnation changes things. Christmas changes things. When Jesus joins us, everything is changed. It changed a stable into a palace. That night in Bethlehem, in a dirty stable, it was changed into the throne room of heaven, as the angels and the magi and the animals and all creation came to worship God in the flesh. Christmas changed a brothel into a church. As Rahab went to her relatives and said, "Come, I found a place to be safe on the day of judgment." It became the ark in the flood. It became the Passover in the Exodus. And Christmas changes a prostitute into a saint. A detail that's easily missed in the story of Rahab is that she then let them down by a rope through the window because her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. Rahab lived in the city wall. She was on the edge of life. When danger came, she was the most vulnerable. She wasn't loved or cared for by her world. And her home should have been the first to fall when God came to Jericho. Instead, it is the only part left standing. Why? Not because she reformed herself, but because she showed allegiance to Jesus. She marked herself as a member of the church. She found safety under the scarlet cords, the blood of Jesus. She was on the edge of life. She was cast away, uncared for, but God brings her into the heart of his life and gives her a real family, his family, making her part of his ancestry. Christmas is God's invitation to come home, even if you've wandered far away. He doesn't require you to clean yourself before you come. Come as you are, and he will change you. He will give you life and bring you into the very center of his life. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.